Good morning, YouTube. Warbles on a lot here. Just getting set up to record the first dog on the moon following the Outsiders on Sunday the 2nd of August. Time now for Outsiders. I'm Barry Cassidy and you're not.
Yes, Tarbaz. This morning's Outsiders are Jane Gilmore. She's a contributing editor at Women's Agenda. Tricia Jarr is a policy analyst at the Centre for Independent Studies. And Chris Berg is Senior Fellow at the Institute of Public Affairs. So, Bronwyn Bishop ended up apologising for her weddings, parties, anything approach to travel and expenses.
I've been listening to what the Australian people are saying, and no matter what anybody else has done, there's no excuse for what I did with the helicopter. And with regard to other things where there's controversy, I have to say I'll be repaying all expenses related to weddings, which, while technically in the rules, just doesn't look right. And I know that I've disappointed and let down the Australian people.
However, some think it's all a bit too late and the cracks are starting to show. Former Victorian Premier Jeff Kennett had this to say.
She's delayed an apology, in my opinion, 3 weeks too late. She's done it having said she wasn't going to apologise initially, so she's obviously been forced into this position. So I think she's now got to think about the well-being of her leader, who has very strongly supported her. I think she's got to think about the party.
By Bronwyn Bishop's about-face an apology?
Of course not. I don't think anybody is. It's quite clearly not a sincere apology, but I think the biggest problem for the government in this is the fact that it's not just derailing them politically, it's actually derailing the government, because their whole message of the lifters and the leaners, and we need to make a change to the way the economy is working so that we can look after the healthcare system and all the other things that they're saying that they need to do. They can't sell that message while Bronwyn's, yet again, there was another $6,000 chartered flight. They can't sell that message while their chosen Speaker of the House is being caught out in this over and over again. And these utterly unconvincing apologies. It's just, it's silly and it's going on far too long and it's doing them far too much damage.
Tricia Jarr, there is nothing juicier than a story about yet another politician at the trough. What is the particular staying power of this one with Bronwyn Bishop, do you think?
I think it does go back to what Jane was saying earlier, like the government is kind of trying to prosecute this message about, we need to be frugal, we need to, spend money better, we need to stop wasting money, especially considering that that's what they went after Labor for 6 years, wasting money. I think that, that's always like, I guess, there's always that element of like, we look at politicians as somewhat, somehow like on this pedestal and then we like to watch them misbehaving. There's always that kind of element of it, but I think it's heightened by the fact that the government is pushing this message and yet its own members seem to be disregarding it while the rest of Australian families are going to have to, tighten their belts in other ways.
Yes. Chris Berg, there is a certain sort of Wagneresque plus Apocalypse Now quality to the image that we've had conjured up for us, haven't we? Bronwyn Bishop as a kind of Valkyrie riding in her helicopter.
Yeah, and one of the reasons that the people in the Liberal Party, people across the Parliament, are so angry about her recklessness of the use of taxpayer funds is because they see their own spending now being filtered through that. So there are a lot of regional members whose electorates are vast and need to charter flights occasionally if you are to get from place to place in the electorate, if you're to meet the voters and so forth. And her use of charter flights for no other purpose than it just seems a bit easier, and it feels very classy, which is obviously a big part of that. It is sort of implying that all those more legitimate uses are a problem and are some sort of rorting the system.
Well, Jane, travel is essential, but the counter image that we got this week was another federal Liberal politician taking a trip to regional Geelong, Malcolm Turnbull on the train, letting everyone know he was doing it by tweeting about it. What was that performance about? Was that mocking her?
Oh, I think that was purely entertainment value, and I think it worked. We all found it very entertaining. I don't think there was any really serious or sinister anything in that. It was just hilarious.
But it's funny because Malcolm loves the train.
Yeah, he
and
does,
this is not the first time he loves to tweet about the train. And you know, good for him. He's really into trains. It's just this was a very an obvious train ride that he made.
Chris, the Liberal front benches are now telling the Prime Minister that Bronwyn Bishop has to go. Has the Prime Minister's loyalty to the Speaker been misplaced and damaging?
Well, yes, absolutely. By this stage, she has to go. But unfortunately, if she left, whether by her own design or whether she was told to leave, the damage will have been done. We've lost weeks of time that the government should have been talking about Bill Shorten from their perspective. And when she ultimately leaves, which she has to ultimately leave, it will be obvious that she damaged the government, and she damaged the government with Tony Abbott's permission.
Now, Clive Palmer took the call for Bronwyn Bishop's resignation as Speaker in another direction.
She doesn't need to put us through torture for a year and a half to get her own personal entitlement. She's been there a long time, over 20 years, been a minister, and she's now 72 years of age. It's time to roll over and give a younger person a go, I think.
So, Trish, according to Clive Palmer, Bronwyn Bishop's great crime is her age. Twice in that Late Line interview, he mentioned how old she is, and that's why she should go. Views on that?
That's very, very odd. I mean, I would like to see him say the same thing about Philip Ruddock, who is usually lauded, at least by people in the Liberal Party, as the father of the house. And I think
same age, I think.
Yeah,
yes, Bronwyn.
Yeah, and people on the other side have a great respect for the fact that he's a veteran of the Parliament. So I think it's a bit interesting there. I think he's got an interesting idea there where he's talking about the fact that she's been in Parliament for so long, and I think that's one of the main reasons why we've seen all of this, is because like when you've been in Parliament for so long, I think you get so absorbed in that bubble, you get so used to just sort of signing off on things that, you know, is charging the taxpayer for them, that you kind of lose that sense of perspective, and you lose that sense of, you know, maybe a $5,000 chopper flight to Geelong for like what would otherwise be like an hour car trip is really not the best use. It's really not appropriate. And I think you do get stuck in that bubble and lose that perspective if you've been there for so long.
Your thoughts on the age criticism, Jane?
Well, I think it's not surprising that it came from Clive Palmer, derailing the relevancy of the conversation, that her age has absolutely nothing to do with her ability to do her job. The question is, can she do her job, which clearly she can't. Chris is right, she's got to go, not just politically, but because she's proven that she can't represent the Parliament with any form of ethics or integrity. That's actually the issue. How old she is or anything else is completely irrelevant, and I think he just makes himself look silly by saying things like that.
I like to think this is Clive Palmer trying to figure out why everybody's angry that someone took a helicopter. It's probably because she's old, maybe?
Chris, it's convenient for the opposition, though, isn't it, all this stuff? I mean, you know, Bronwyn Bishop hasn't been their favourite speaker.
This is an ideal situation for the opposition, because it puts the Speaker, and now no one in the Australian public cares who the Speaker is. No one cares about how well Parliament functions. They're all just a bunch of clowns in most of people's opinion. But now Labor has some concrete evidence that speaks to the Australian public about why she's not a good Speaker. And of course, Bill Shorten for the last couple of weeks, or at least a couple of weeks ago, was feeling really on the back foot about the Royal Commission, going into the National Conference, lots of controversial positions. The government could have made hay on that. This is the best thing that's happened to Labor for years, you might say, you know, certainly since the 2014 budget.
Well, now, this controversy over Bronwyn Bishop and calls for her resignation comes at a time when the cry has gone up again for more women in politics. The federal Liberal MP, Dr. Sharman Stone, says her party needs to get serious about addressing the representation of women, and this is how to do it.
Now, you look at the margin, you say, right, in that pre-selection, we want at least 50% women to be standing up there, strutting their thing, showing that they are keen, that they want to get out there and also win this seat or this Senate position. So let there not be a pre-selection until there's at least 50% of the candidates are women. We require there to be 50-50 men and women pre-selection delegates, but we don't require there to be 50-50 women up there doing their thing. Now, that's a nonsense. Let's get out there, show we're serious.
Sharman Stone doesn't use the Q word there, but that's what she's calling for, while others talk about minimum targets rather than quotas. Chris, what's the ideological objection to quotas?
I don't think there is one. I don't have a problem with this idea because, in my view, a political party should seek to represent the people that they want to represent. They not only should seek to do that, they should look as if they represent the people. So if you were a Liberal Party strategist right now and if you thought, well, people are criticizing us for not having enough women, then you should probably make some institutional change to do so. This isn't a question about merit or anything like that. Because these are fundamentally political decisions. Who you're going to put into Parliament? Well, why can't the gender of one of your representatives be one of those factors that you care about?
Yeah, but people like Christopher Pyne and Kelly O'Dwyer are calling for minimum targets rather than quotas, Joan.
I can't believe that we're still having this conversation. I can't believe we're still protesting this stuff. This should be just the very basics of we are supposed to have a representative democracy. Let's actually have a representative democracy. And it's not just about women. It's also about representing all the other minority groups as well. I am so sick of seeing on TV all the time middle-aged, middle-class white guys. I'm so sick of it. That we have to have a discussion about should we have more women. Of course we should have more women. That's not even a question.
Well, Trish, I have to say that I was a bit shocked to learn that it wasn't until 2009 that there were any childminding facilities at Parliament House in Canberra. What other barriers are yet to fall to allow that gender balance to be addressed?
Well, I think there's also something to be said, and this I think goes back to what Shum and Stone were saying about the fact that you don't necessarily have women sticking their hands up and to run in pre-selections. I think there's always that kind of issue of attitudes, and maybe I think what's interesting for me is not necessarily like the number of women in cabinet or the number of women who actually make it into Parliament, so much as why aren't there more women sticking their hands up in the pre-selection thing? And then I think that kind of speaks to what happens at the grassroots level of political parties, and maybe this, I don't know much about the other political parties, but it might exist there too. It's like, is there, is that kind of criteria for success, is that skewed in a way that really, reflects men better than women? Is there hostility towards women? I think that's probably, you need to kind of start from that level, I think, before you kind of start talking about what's happening in the actual Parliament.
Chris, are there barriers at the grassroots?
Politics is incredibly unfriendly to family life. Think of the life of a politician as going from work to Canberra to branch meetings after work to school meetings to weddings to
politicians have children.
Yeah, no, I understand. In fact, Christopher Pyne just released a book basically about that, why he spends so much time on the road doing politics. And I think that, unfortunately, that selects against women in a lot of ways.
But why does it select against women if men have children too?
No, I say unfortunately, but I think that's one of the explanations, that there is some suggestion that the women are more reluctant to leave their kids than the men. Now, I'm not defending that, and I'm not saying that, but I think that's what's happening.
But my question about that is, if that's what's happening, and if the assumption is that women should be staying home, again, why are we still having this discussion? Because surely we're past the idea that women should be staying home with
more
the
and
babies
better
now.
house husbands. Trish,
I think that's
Trish, could you job share being an MP, do you reckon?
I don't know how you possibly could, at least not within our kind of very party-driven political system. I suppose it's probably easier to job share being a parent. And I think it's interesting that out of the two women we have in cabinet at the moment, like Julie Bishop has never had children and I think only has a partner, and Susan Lee's children are all grown up. So I think there is that kind of element of not so much that, we expect women to stay at home, but maybe there's a question of the fact that the women who are married to certain people are not, their husbands are not necessarily able to or willing to do the kinds of thing that, Christopher Pyne's wife might do, or Tony Abbott's wife might do. And I think that's kind of speaks to like a broader issue within society and business more generally, is that, even if you do have women who are willing and able to take on that role, there's not necessarily someone there to pick up the slack. And I think that goes
okay, approaching the upload limit, so I've got to stop this one here. First Moondog will be on the next broadcast.